All right, the one and only Randy Jackson from Zebra, which is weird for me to say because I was not born in the States, so I pronounce zebra. So if that happens every now and then, I do apologize, but I'm going to try and stick to zebra because my wife tells me that that's how I need to say it. I obviously know lots about you, huge fan, know about your work as a singer and a songwriter, know about your work with Zebra and your tribute bands, The Doors, Pink Floyd, Zeppelin, all that stuff. I know you've worked as an engineer on some of your records, as a producer, etc., etc., etc. So I'm not going to do my typical thing, which is always asking my guests to do a brief introduction on themselves. I feel like that'd be kind of insulting given how illustrious of a career you've had. So we're going to jump straight into your life and try and get as much detail on your life in the hour that we have. What I'd like to start with, Mr. Jackson,
Mhm.
is please talk to me a little bit about your upbringing. And then tell me, if you wouldn't mind, how you kind of got into music. And then, if you wouldn't mind even further, once you got into music, did you have any kind of plans on how to transition what might have started as a hobby into a career?
Okay. So we start off in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was born in 1955. Both of my parents were attorneys. They met at Tulane Law School. And my mom mainly worked as a clerk for different judges. My dad practiced law for a while, but I had two lawyers in the family, so but they both did play music also. They had played anyway. My father played the drums, and my mom played the piano. My dad actually played drums for Bob Wills when he was really young. Bob
Wow.
Wills, Texas Playboys, when they would come through Louisiana. Um, and so I grew up with music around me. They played a lot of music, and they encouraged us to play too. They wanted us to learn instruments. So I had uh, my cousin, actually, Judy Hicks. She is the one that started teaching me piano like at 5, 6 years old. And I love football. So it was like I was always torn between the two. But it came down like when I was about 9 years old and the Beatles came out, and I got a Beatle 45. I Want to Hold Your Hand, and I saw her standing there from a girl down the block, Linda Rosenbaum. And she gave it to me, says, "You got to listen to this. It's great." And I put it on, and I listened to it. I couldn't make it out because I think it was "I Want to Hold Your Hand" was the first one I was listening to. And I could, for some reason, and it baffles me to this day, I couldn't get the beat. Where was the beat? Now, I'd been listening to popular music for years. My parents had it. I was familiar with the radio and stuff, but it just sounded to me like from another planet, at that moment anyway. And but I liked it. I liked the way it sounded. It wasn't like put offish. So uh, my parents took my brother and I to see the Beatles in 1964. We got to see the whole thing for real, with all the girls going crazy, and it looked like this might be a fun thing to do if you could do it. And, so I started playing guitar around that time, and actually wrote a couple of songs back then. I wrote them with the girl that brought me the 45, and I think the reason I wrote the songs was because I couldn't play anybody else's songs, so I had to write songs. I knew a couple of chords, but I couldn't tell what they were playing on the record, and I don't think there were any Beatles songbooks out at that point. But I knew a couple of chords, and we wrote some songs, and then from there, that was like 1964, 1965, and then all of a sudden I'm starting to listen to a lot more rock music, and listening to bands like the Allman Brothers and Grand Funk. I listened to a lot of Grand Funk. Mark Farner, was a little simpler to copy, with the guitar licks and stuff. At least he had some licks that were, not just blazing along, and it was, I could teach myself a little more through that. And so I listened to a lot of Grand Funk, then Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and the Moody Blues were a big influence on me also. So, and I was kind of developing an idea of what I wanted to do, but I really, I wasn't really writing. I wrote those two songs, and here I am, just like plugging away. And I got to meet Felix Hanemann, who at the time had his own band, and it was all originals. The band was called Shepherd's Bush, and they were looking for a guitar player. And I said, all right, I'll do this. This sounds good. I kind of like the music and stuff. And Felix was the lead singer and the rhythm guitar player. And we got together. We played for about a year. We had a 5-piece band. Felix was the lead singer along with his roommate, Eldridge Madare. He was like the singer, but they both sang. So
Okay.
it was kind of unison they would be singing, which was interesting. So that lasted about a year. And then I met Guy through a mutual friend, a guy named Keith Revels, who was the manager at a bar that I was working at, a bar called The Library. It's out by the lakefront in New Orleans. And Keith said, I know this guy plays drums pretty good. He's down in the French Quarter and he's from California. He just came here for a Mardi Gras. So, I went down, I met with Guy, and then got together with him, and he was just phenomenal. I mean, I was like, wow, this guy, he was on another level from any drummer that I had played with before. And so we went and started playing, and I convinced Felix to play bass with us. We had a keyboard player at that time also that was playing, and we were doing some more progressive music at that time. We weren't doing the originals at that point. We were doing some learning some covers because we were going to go out and play some gigs and make some money. We weren't making money doing originals with the Shepherd's Bush, but we were going to try to do it with this new thing. There were a lot of bands on the circuit back then, so we were learning some Jethro Tull and some Yes, and this progressive kind of stuff. And through playing a couple of gigs, we found out the kids are there to dance, so we needed to learn dance music. And the keyboard player, Tim Thorson, he really just wanted to do the Tull and the Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and he was not into learning these dance songs. And so eventually he left the band, and we regrouped as a 3-piece, as Zebra, and we learned a bunch of stuff, a bunch of songs. We were playing songs by like 60 different bands.
Wow.
And I started writing at that point, wrote a couple of songs, turned into like 4 or 5. And then when we came out in February of 1975, we were doing the covers and just throwing in the original songs right there, but not really announcing them. We weren't going to say, here's our original. And which was kind of smart in a way, because it gave you, if people liked the song, they would tell you, and you knew that was an honest thing. They'd go, what was that? Instead of you asking, what'd you think of my song? What are they going to tell you? They're going to tell you, oh, it's great. Thanks, Mom. Yeah, nobody's going to give you the truth there. But if we just threw the songs in and just added them to the set, we'd see what stuck. And it really worked out for us. Even after we had come to New York, we did the same thing. And it really it shaped a lot of what ended up being on the first Zebra record.
That's amazing. What a cool story. I love the fact that you were shoving originals within the covers, because I've heard of a lot of bands that have done that kind of thing. And, I mean, obviously, when you're playing in a music kind of city, and there's not that many of them left, but when you are playing in a music city, you try and suggest that to some bands that are playing the songs of the day, and they always think that like you can't do it, but you're proof that you can do it, Okay, so let's briefly backtrack even more. I mean, you've pretty much just told me about the origins of Zebra,
right?
And how you met Felix and how you met Guy and all that kind of stuff. Here's a crucial pivot, at least I think, within the Zebra Camp career. Okay, you guys find yourself playing a lot in New York. And from what I read or what I know from the years of following you, is you guys moved to Long Island or somewhere within New York. I've always felt that these kinds of things are life changes or can be life changes. The kind of moments that you might not have realized it at the time, but it potentially changed your life. And I talk to a lot of musicians because of the podcast, and we talk about location a lot, and we talk about the invents of social media and how important location might or might not be now. We'll get to that. My main question here, though, is what caused you guys to relocate? And once you relocated, I mean, obviously the scene was different then to what it is now, but was it like not terrifying for you guys to kind of just go to this new place and be like, well, we're a band, everybody, pick us kind of thing? What was your plan? Did you have one? Was it just a matter of we're young guys, we're gonna do this, we're gonna rock and roll and see what happens? What was it?
Well, we're living in New Orleans. We're from New Orleans. We were very familiar with the New Orleans music scene. Felix had worked at Jazz City,
Hmm.
which was owned by Cosmo Matassa, and he had done all the early, New Orleans rhythm and blues and rock and roll and Fats Domino, Irma Thomas, all that stuff. And
Yeah.
so he was also closely affiliated with Ahmet Ertegun. So we kind of knew though that New Orleans music was what people came to look for in New Orleans when they were trying to sign bands. They weren't going to come to New Orleans to sign a rock band. And we figured, well, we need to get to a place, either Los Angeles or New York. And we were doing really well in New Orleans at the time. We were packing the clubs. There wasn't really any place else for us to go at that point if we were just doing what we were doing, except kind of down. We needed to move out and make ourselves a little bit scarce. We knew we couldn't keep doing what we're doing all the time. So we had a friend of ours in New Orleans, a guy named Richie Mancini, whose family had connections up here in New York. And one of the connections was with a club owner. And we flew the guy down, we wined and dined him. He came to the gig, he loved it. His name was Lee Feldman. And Lee, I'm bringing you guys up. This is fantastic. You guys are great. And so we're having the big going away. Zebra's going to New York, and so our final gig. And it was in the summer at this point. And, here we go. We finished the gig. We're getting ready to take off to go to New York, getting stuff ready. And we get a phone call from Lee saying, fellas, I think it would be better if we waited a little while. I don't have as many gigs for you right now as I wanted to. And so we were like, wow. Well, we said, okay, we'll just deal with it, Well, it happened again, exactly the same way. A couple of months later, we did our last gig. We're all ready to go. Here he is. We call him up. We're on our way, Lee. Yeah, guys, same story. I think he should wait a little while. And so I got off the phone with him and talked to Felix and Guy. I said, listen, we can't cry wolf 3 times. I said, we've done it twice. We got away with it, Yeah. I said, we can either hide, for a couple of months and say we went to New York and just lie about it, which wasn't really serious, or we can just not go and keep playing here, and grin and bear it, or we can just go and tell him we're coming up regardless, because he did say he had a gig for us. We did have one gig on New Year's Eve. So that's what we did. We just called him back and said, Lee, we're coming up, even if it's just for 1-2 gigs. That's it. We're on our way. We can't not do this now. And so, that's how we kind of left. And we were pretty confident, going up there because we had done well in New Orleans and we had seen some of the bands from New York. And we had kind of an idea of what we were going to be up against here. And so we were confident coming out of there. And we left to arrive, I guess, 2 days before our first gig, which was New Year's Eve in 1976, going into 77. And we were playing with a band called Rat Race Choir. And they were a big, great band, doing really good on the circuit here, but they were just so good. I mean, they were just like I mean, this was nothing like what we had seen. We were used to like the New York Dolls, you know. I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was New York, it was Kiss, New York Dolls, you know. But this band was just, off the charts. Another band that we knew that was good, great band, was the Good Rats. Good Rats had encouraged us to go to New York, and they were touring the country at the time. They had their own album. We had met them down at a festival down in Louisiana. But this Rat Race Choir, they were doing, the covers, and they were like killing it. And so, welcome to New York. This is it. And it was good. It was inspiring
Yeah.
for us. We met a lot of people up here along the way. Everybody was friendly. It was a friendly competition. It was, we got a pretty good handle on the New York attitude and New Yorkers, and it wasn't too far from what we knew at home. We weren't in New York City, which I think would have been different. We were out on Long Island, and we were fortunate. This guy Lee. Once we told him we're coming, he put us up in his house. So he had to work extra hard to get us out of there.
That's a great plan.
Yeah, and he did a great job. He got us gigs, and he got us gigs opening up for a lot of bands. So we opened up for a lot of bands that were already doing very well. We opened up for a band called Essence that was doing progressive kind of stuff. Also, we opened up for Twisted Sister. We opened up for a band called Stanton Anderson. We had seen. I think we played with Stanton Anderson once, and they were like a country kind of rock band, but they did a lot of originals. And there were bands up here they were all doing a little bit of originals. It wasn't like, but people knew that they would announce them. They weren't doing what we were doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like I said, we wouldn't announce our original songs, but it served a twofold purpose. I mean, one was, do they like the song or not? Second one was the club owner couldn't complain. You can't do your own songs. I want you to play Zeppelin. I want you to play Aerosmith. Don't do your own songs.
Yeah.
We never got any of that because they didn't know what we were playing.
Yeah. Yeah. Great planning.
Yeah. Nobody was complaining. And so that's kind of in a nutshell the story of, how we got in, why, really why we wanted a record deal. That's why we came up here,
Yeah. 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 Ambition. Kind of driven by ambition.
We were young. That was the main thing.
Yeah.
You're not so worried about, we had three of us. We all had the same thing in mind. And we were young enough. We were in our early 20s. And let's hit the road. Yeah.
I think having like-minded people around you is a powerful thing. Sometimes you will see certain bands and some of them still do very well. But if there's like one person or maybe two people pulling all the weights, resentment seems to slip in a lot quicker. I mean, you look at a band like Zebra, the fact that the three of you still make music together is really quite something. I mean, we'll talk about that, but I want to finish on this location topic. I briefly touched on it. How important do you feel location is for an artist or a band to break nowadays? Or with so many social medias and Instagram and Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, all of these things, do you think it's a matter of you can be anywhere in the world provided you are making content that appeals to people?
Well, it's a different world, no doubt. And, the way we did it was through playing live. I mean, even back then, there were bands that would just, do their originals, make a demo, send it to a record company, and they'd get a record deal if the record company liked it. We just didn't have the connections to get that done when we started. And it took us playing a lot and getting a following in order to do that. These days, I don't know. I think you just have to be savvy, computer savvy, and if you're not, you're gonna pay money to somebody to do the stuff for you. But I don't think you need as much as it was in the past, for at least for us. To location isn't that big of a difference. But I do feel like playing live is still important. And if you're in a place that you're doing well and things aren't going great, or you haven't gotten the record deal yet, it can't hurt just to shake things up, to physically move, and it'll tell you a lot about the band too, because when you move, everybody's got to like really commit at that point, and it would be a shame to have spent 10 years getting a record deal, and then you get one, and then one of the guys doesn't want to go on the road, or two or three, or and so it because that's what a band is. A band travels, a band records, a band does all these things, and can't really live a quote unquote normal life. So I think it's good for them to travel, but as far as getting a record deal, I don't know that it's not like it was. You really needed a record deal back then.
Yeah.
Radio airplay was everything, and it's not anymore.
Yeah, very true. Talking of record deals, come 1982, Zebra signed a 5-album deal with Atlantic Records. We're going to talk about that in a second, the Atlantic Records thing, because I'm sure that was really a great feeling knowing that you're a big Zeppelin fan. But talk to me about how the deal comes about and what your overall experience working with the record label was like.
Well, I'll start there. I mean, once we got the record deal, the record company pretty much let us do what we wanted to do. We had the right producer. We had Jack Douglas. We had gotten him, and he had never produced a record for Atlantic. And they were very excited about it, about having him doing a record for them. And they left us alone, no creative. I mean, if we asked for, opinions and stuff like that, but except for our A&R man, who was Jason Flom, the label left us alone to make the record the way we wanted to. We had approached Atlantic Records years earlier with a demo, and it was pretty much the same demo that we got the record deal with.
Amazing.
But the whole, the staff and everybody, the president of the label was different. Times were, it was a little different, a couple of years, and we were told at that point that if we'd have come out 10 years earlier, it would have been great. But, things were changing, and you're not fitting into this time slot, but we were getting airplay on Long Island. Program director by the name of Bob Buckman, who was the program director for a radio station called WBAB, really the biggest rock station on Long Island, had played one of our songs on their Homegrown series and got a great response, and people were requesting it and requesting it and requesting it after that. And so he put it in a regular rotation, and within 6 months, he had 4 or 5 songs that were in regular rotation at the station. We had no record deal, and he just loved the band. So, like I tell you, this Jason Flom was our A&R guy, but before before that ever happened, he was just working record stores and bringing records to radio stations. He wasn't signing bands.
Yeah.
Was at the radio station talking to Bob Buckman about getting a record played on from Atlantic. And Bob brought up Zebra. And he said, man, I got to tell you, they've got the top 5 requests at the station right now. And he says, oh, that's great. Local requests. He goes, no, they're not local. And he goes down the list, and, he sees that number 6 is like Back in Black, AC/DC. He's got All of My Love, Led Zeppelin, pretty much like the whole bottom half of the top 10 was filled with Atlantic artists that Jason knew. So he was like, no, this can't be real. But it was real. I mean, that we were getting that many requests. You couldn't buy our records, so where else were they going to hear it?
Yeah.
And so Jason went back to Atlantic and brought the tape in to the new president, Doug Morris. And Jason was able to get into the office because Jason's father was on the board of directors of Warner's. It wasn't just like anybody who worked at Atlantic could walk into the president's office, but Jason had an in. And so that was fortunate for us. And we got the record deal. And a couple of years later, I heard a story that, that Doug Morris had taken our demo tape and he was riding back to his house. He was going to listen to it in the car, not his car, but they had a limo for him, and he's in the back. He puts the tape in, and it starts to listen, and the first song is "Who's Behind the Door," which has a minute long acoustic intro.
Yeah.
And well, all the record labels get to the hook, get to the hook.
Yeah, always.
We haven't even got to the vocal yet. He ejects it, and this radio, if anybody's familiar with how those radio and cassette tape things work back then, when you eject the tape, whatever station it's on, it's going to come right up.
Yeah.
And that was WBAB, and they were playing the song, and he's like, scratching his head. This has to be what I just heard. He puts it back in and ejects it a couple of times, and then he listens to the whole song on the radio.
Wow.
And that's how we got the deal. At the end of the song, the DJ says that's the number one requested song at the station. Zebra, Who's Behind the Door. So,
how incredible!
Yeah.
And if that story is true, you can't help but believe that fate. Yes, you needed to help fate by going to the right place and doing the work, of course.
Yeah.
But man, that sounds to me like it was meant to be, if nothing else.
Well, it does. I'm not. You know how it is in your life. I'm sure you've had coincidences happen to you. There's synchronicity, and sometimes it piles up, not in just one or two coincidences in a row that have something to do with each other, but you have three or four. Like, how's this possible?
Yeah, yeah.
You just take it and roll with it. We did do a lot of work to get the following that we had on Long Island, and probably Bob Buckman would have never even known about us if we hadn't done that. So
yeah, no, most definitely. Yeah. So did you guys entertain other offers, or was Atlantic the one that you wanted to be with, knowing that a lot of the bands that you seem to be into were with Atlantic?
Well, you remember I told you that we had previously shopped it to Atlantic.
Yeah.
And he had shopped it to a bunch of other labels, and so the thought of going to back out and reshopping it at this point was not, because we had the same demo that they had heard before.
Yeah.
They just happened to switch presidents and and staff, and it was just timing was right. So no, it didn't even cross my mind. I said Atlantic's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus you had the momentum. I mean, so like, even though you had shopped it before, how those labels used to work. I'm not sure how they still work. I mean, this industry has changed so much. So I don't know if they'll end up with piles of CDs or cassettes anymore. Probably get a lot of links like Dropbox and WeTransfer links. But you probably find that before that momentum, they might not have even listened to it. It could have just been sitting there. And then as you building up the fan base and the momentum and getting the radio play, that's a different ball game. It puts you in a better position of power. I use that loosely, of course, but it puts you in a better position because suddenly they can see some dollar signs, because they know, well, if these guys have this many thousand people following them, we can make some money, So here's a bit of a strange question, Randy, because everybody, looks at success in a different way. But in regards to getting the record deal, getting to that point, the first album comes out, it does really well, really well. Did you feel that the success that you had potentially manifested at that point in your life, did it meet all your expectations, or were there moments that made you think, this isn't what I thought it was going to be at all?
I don't remember being disappointed. I only remember being excited. I knew we were going to sell a lot of records when it came out, because we had so many fans.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. And we did. We sold, 75,000 copies in the first 2 weeks with no airplay, just between New York and New Orleans. And it wasn't until a couple of months later that we sold a handful of records in St. Louis off of airplay. A station there called KSHE had started playing Who's Behind the Door, and we started selling some records there. And that's when Atlantic got excited, because they knew, that those first 75,000 records were people who were lined up to buy it to begin with. They were, they were already there. And so I was excited. I mean, listen, you can always look back and say it could have been bigger, or it could have been less. But when I look back at the whole, zebra trip, I'd have to say that I'm glad it happened the way it happened, not only for business reasons but for personal reasons. I think I've got a great family, and I don't know that being on the road would have been too conducive to that if we'd have really like been touring the world, and that would have been it.
And success is such a funny thing. I mean, it's really in the eye of the beholder, Anyway, okay. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit here. Obviously, you've done several gigs and tours with Zebra. I know you've done many solo tours. I didn't know this actually, but I read that you had joined Jefferson Airplane for a while, doing their reunion tour back in like 89. That
Right.
was fascinating to read about. So I got a couple questions about touring in general. Firstly, what are the parts of touring you enjoy versus maybe don't enjoy so much? And secondly, and this is a bit of a weird one, but I ask most guys who've spent a lot of their time on the road, have you got anything that you do personally for yourself when on the road that, whether you want to think of it as a ritual or just a bit of downtime or something, do you do anything to kind of keep sane? And I say that a bit tongue in cheek because I know a lot of people might think that's dramatic, but a lot of guys go a little dilly on the road. Yeah, obviously, you're away from all your home comforts, your family, your friends, girlfriends, pets, children, etc., etc., etc. And this is a part of music that's always really fascinated me. As someone who spends a lot of time on the road or has done in my life, never to the level of someone like yourself, but mental health is so important. Obviously, physical health is too. And I know by talking to various musicians with the podcast, some guys do certain things. Some guys will, you know, make sure they've got their favorite album to listen to every day. Some guys want complete silence away from the other members of the band and the crew. Some guys want to find the local bakery and get a donut or whatever it is. Do you have anything that you do that maybe just makes you feel a little bit of normalcy while on the road?
Well, I don't know that I'm really qualified to get into that, because I have friends of mine that go out on the road for months and months and months. And the last time that I did that was probably with the Jefferson Airplane back in 1989. And so, with Zebra, it's been easy for us to do fly dates, where we just fly in and we fly back home. Same thing with the symphony shows that I do, and most of my acoustic shows. We'll fly in, do a couple of shows, and then come home. I don't have anything in particular that I do to keep my sanity. I mean, I just try to eat healthy. I think if I was still drinking and doing drugs like back in the day, yeah, I don't think I'd even be here right now. I'd probably be 6 feet under. But just I think trying to keep the schedule normal for me is the most important thing, and eating right. And I bring a lot of food with me on the road too. I eat a lot of this last few years, a lot of protein powder. I don't. I'm vegetarian, so I'm not eating meat, and sometimes we go to places that that's all they have is meat. So I make sure I've got some food with me, and I try to get sleep. That's the most important thing for me on the road. I suffered from depression my whole life, and when you start getting into that not sleeping, and start getting into a manic state and then come down into the depressed state, it's nothing worse, and it's brutal on your head. But sleeping is the main thing, no matter what head I'm at, is to make sure I get some sleep. So I've got that pretty much down now, and not really haven't had any real issues, except for maybe a couple of times about 20 years ago. I had a couple of shows where I hadn't slept for a while, and it definitely showed. So,
Hmm.
so the sleep is really important.
Yeah, I have
Just
to agree.
watching my intake,
Yeah. Yeah, man. The body is an engine, right? So what you put in does affect it. I never thought so when I was 20. As I get older, I'm like, oh man, I can't eat that. You know, I was actually having that conversation with my wife last night. I'd pulled a double yesterday, and I was quite hungry on the way home. And you just have no options for healthy food at certain times of night. You know, it's just like you're basically left to your options. And if you're trying to be healthy or if you're trying to watch what you put in your body, sometimes it's very difficult. So I
yeah,
think keeping what you actually want on you, that's pretty good advice.
yeah,
Um, okay, so this is something that has turned into a bit of a controversial subject over the years. Um, Especially the last like 5 years, which is weird because I feel like everybody's doing it now. But I want to touch on the fact that in the early 90s already, when you were playing solo, you were incorporating Macintosh computers into that. I actually found a date that is as early as like 91, 92 that you started doing this. This is revolutionary, in my opinion. You know, maybe people don't think so, but the fact that back then this was, I mean, now it's normal, right? Like, or at least it's considered normal. A lot of guys still bitch and moan about it, but wow, like this is unreal to me. So, did you ever receive any backlash by doing this? And were there ever any risks from a live perspective when running the computers? Because I know nowadays, I'm in a couple bands that run computers, and I'm in a couple bands that use pads and clicks and backing tracks and all these things. And there's always that tiny little thing in the back of your head that goes, uh-oh, hope this doesn't suddenly get a like gremlin in it and like crap out on me. And touch wood, most times it doesn't, but you do see footage online. You know, you can't make a mistake doing that stuff nowadays because it lands up somewhere, and then next thing you're on, you see these like incredible musicians get exposed by having a computer as if it's like this cheating thing, when the same people who are complaining about it are using, you know, bought beats in their songs and auto-tune to death. It's like it's kind of weird. It's almost contradictory because you're complaining that musicians are using computers to enhance their live performance, but you also complain when their performance isn't as good as the record, or you complain when they aren't doing it. It's like you can't please people at the moment, it seems. But what was your experience? Did you get much backlash?
I didn't get any backlash, at least none told to me. The thing that with me, it was kind of an exercise in keeping my sanity because I think the putting the whole show together was the result of Atlantic Records deciding not to put out my solo record, China Rain. Uh, they thought I knew it was the uh, grunge had taken over, and they didn't have any grunge. They were like the last on the bandwagon, but they didn't want to spend the money to put the record out. And the record was great. And I was couched me for a couple of weeks, but I went in and programmed this whole show. But I didn't do it by recording the tracks. I did it through MIDI. Everything was MIDI. And the more I started learning about the MIDI, the more I realized I could do a lot of things with MIDI. I could have the mix happening, with different controllers, and I had my voice going through controllers that were controlled by MIDI that could raise and lower the vocal level. All the delays, the reverbs, everything was being controlled by this. And then I added the lights to it. So the lights were perfect with it, And I wasn't standing during the shows. I'd be sitting and playing electric guitar or acoustic guitar, but doing the vocals. And during the time that I was doing it, people just loved the show. The problem was, like you said, what's going to happen? Can you, and back then it wasn't just, will this computer work? It was like the computer's connected to an interface that's connected like, 7, 8 keyboards plus, all the effects and the lights, and they're all connected by MIDI cable. So I've got
Yeah.
like at least 30 MIDI cables that have to all work.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of nerve wracking at times, And But yeah, it was different. No, I don't. There wasn't anybody else doing that. I was always kind of on the edge of the technology back then, and I just said this will get my mind off of the non-release of my record, and it did. It
Yeah.
was therapeutic.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm totally getting the vibe of and obviously I don't know you, but you're definitely giving me the vibe of you seem to make things happen or try to make things happen. And to take a brief pause for the cause from the interview here for a second, for anyone listening to this interview, this is heavily inspiring because if it teaches you nothing else, you just have to take some initiative for your own development. You can't expect because you suddenly have a deal or a manager or an A&R guy or whoever, you can't suddenly just sit back and think that these people are going to just make your career and hand it to you on a platter. You can't. It's I'd love to say it works like that. Definitely doesn't work like that. Not with anybody that I've spoken to, not in my own life, not in life in general, even away from music. So it's like very inspiring stuff, Randy.
oh,
Um, let's talk about AI in general, since we kind of went into the Macintosh or the Mac and the
sure.
MIDI world. AI seems to be in an interesting place right now. Most people just seem to know Chat GPT, which is cool. Like if that's what they want to know, that's what they want to know. Um, a lot of creative people seem to follow it a little bit closer. Not everybody. So again, I'm stereotyping. But let's talk about its potential influence or maybe lack of influence on the future of music. Have you got any opinions in this regard?
I mean, what I really think is that it's not going to get any worse. It's only going to get better at whatever it does. And it's going to replace so many different jobs, which actually the majority of them I think are mundane, jobs. But even a mundane job can be a good job for somebody who, just needs something to do to get through the day.
Yeah.
And but I think, you're going to find doctors, lawyers, who knows what it's like when the credit cards first came out online. People, I'm not putting my credit card. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. Well, everybody does it now. And so I think it's going to be kind of the same, not exactly the same, of course, but it's going to be similar to the AI thing where people are going to go, well, I'm not going to trust what that thing's telling me right now. And because you could use it to diagnose you know illnesses that you have. You can use it for legal advice, and
Yeah.
it's some of it's excellent. Of course there's dangers there, getting fed the wrong information or not knowing enough about the subject yourself to know if you're being lied to or not. It goes with any business and with anybody you deal with. You just have to treat AI as if it's capable of anything a human is capable of doing. And that
Yeah.
includes the lying and the deception, or, being paid or skewed in one direction to do something.
Yeah.
I've heard some of the songs and how they've taken the sounds of people's voices, the Beatles, and this is just one example, and used it to create other songs. And the songs are okay now, but they're only going to get better. That's what I really think. And I've never thought that I came up with anything on my own completely. I think I derived whatever I wrote from my experiences in life, which is still creating.
Yeah.
Just you're using a different palette, than other people are. But once AI has a palette of everything, it's going to be, God only knows. If there's no such thing as absolute pure creativity, unless it's in your dreams or something, we're going to see some really crazy stuff happen with it.
Yeah.
You know, everything, engineering, mixing. I don't see it replacing performance. I think people can still perform, but I think it's a lot it's going to change a lot more than people are thinking or want it to at this point. To me, it's, it could be really scary. And so you really should learn about it and know as much about it as you can, especially if you're young right now. I'm a little older. The people that are my age may or may not be around long enough to experience the full effects of AI. But if I was younger, I'd be right on it and want to know as much as I could about it. It is the future.
Look, I'm trying to take more of a positive, like, we can't control what's going to happen kind of approach,
Yeah.
and only worry about the things we can control. But I follow copyright a lot, and work as a producer a lot. And so I try and see what's happening in that side of the world. And there are some terrifying things that are happening at the moment. And a lot of original music composers or creators, whatever you want to call them, they seem to be kind of having a bit of a shrug their shoulders kind of approach. And I get it, each to their own. I can't dispute that at all. But I cannot agree enough in that maybe people should just be paying a little bit more attention. Maybe we end up not having to worry about it at all, but you're already seeing it affect sync. You're already seeing it affect mixing and mastering engineers. You're seeing it affect music creation. I mean, only in the last 3 months, the change of this kind of sounds a bit synthetic to, wait, is that real or fake? Is starting to happen. And it kind of blows my mind that so many people who do create don't seem to want to care about it. And that's a good and a bad thing, right? Because maybe to come back to the point, maybe you shouldn't have to worry about it. Maybe just create and live your life. But I don't know. I grew up in the 80s, man, and there were enough movies that made me see that computers might take over the world. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen anytime soon, but I definitely don't want to be living in the sewer eating rat burgers like in Demolition Man.
Hopefully we'll be treated better than that.
Yeah, one can hope, right?
Well,
Um,
I think the people that are smart and are young right now will use AI
yeah,
for creation, and we'll kind of direct it, and it may be more of a, the only thing I could compare it to is like a DJ. These DJs, get up there with these big shows and they got all this stuff going on, but it's not really, a lot of it's not their music. They're just mixing stuff, that other people did. And I think that, this is going to maybe even lead to more of that,
yeah,
I think people are always going to love to see people live perform, see somebody with just an acoustic guitar playing with all the mistakes and everything else. But AI can do it too. It can make the mistakes. It'll be able to it's gonna be crazy.
it's interesting to see what, even as quick as the next 6 months, it's very interesting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah,
I mean, it's learning so bloody quick, you
yeah.
know. Randy, what, in your opinion, has been the hardest part about being a career musician?
Um, the hardest part. I can't even really. There's nothing I can really complain about. I one thing I've had to travel way overseas, and long traveling trips are a drag. But if I was on the road all the time, I'd probably complain that I didn't see my family enough. But I'm not on the road that all the time. I go out on weekends and come back. So in a way, it's even better than if I was working a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
I work 5-6 days a week, and I'm making a living doing what I'm doing. And that's, to me, is like that's all success to me. Just being able to do that for whoever you are and whatever you do. If you wake up and people ask you when you're going to retire, and you can just say never.
Yeah, especially if you're doing what you love.
Yeah.
Why stop?
Yep. Yeah. So I don't like the accounting of, and you have to do it, the accounting side of music, but that would go with any job or anything you're doing. it's just a pain in the butt, and it's one of those things you have to do.
Yeah.
If I had to vote for it, make it a flat tax all around, I'll make it real easy.
What about in regards to being in a band? I mean, bands can be they can be hard. You're dealing with different personalities. It's essentially having a different type of family that you are traveling with or creating with or working with. Um, what do you think has been the hardest part about being in a band? So not necessarily like just trying to make it as a musician, but you know, juggling different personalities, keeping the friendships, all of that kind of thing.
But when we first started, first 5 years, I would say, we were learning how what we could expect from each person and what we could expect from ourselves and how we were feeling about each of the three of us. And I think we had some pretty big blowouts in the first 5 years. But that once we got past the 5 years, the 6 years, we haven't had that, because we kind of accepted that we're not expecting somebody to change in any drastic way. Oh, this will get better later. This will get better. No, you either accept how people are, and if it gets better, then great, but don't expect it. And I think that all three of us kind of did that. And that's what makes that aspect of it easier. When we lived together, it was tough. That was really tough because now, all the little idiosyncrasies, the habits come right to your face, and you're just like, I can't take this anymore. It gets on your nerves. But once we were through all of that, it hasn't been that big of a deal. We've stuck together. We've always played. We've always, I think each of us is empathetic towards the other ones, regardless of whatever situation we've been in, and that's been fortunate. Another thing is we're all on the same page politically, and I think it means more now than it ever has.
Oh, yes.
But it has always helped. Even going back to the very beginning, because there's always political views, but that's really helped.
Yeah.
Made a big difference. Just one less thing to think about.
Yeah, yeah. If you had to hypothetically, and I'm just throwing this out there more as a let's see what you say type question.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we could go back in time, or maybe not even go back in time. Let's say though that you have the experience and the know-how that you currently have. You've gone through all the lessons that you've learned. You know what you know. But you were starting again as a musician. You were launching your career. You were trying to get out there.
Right.
What would you do to get out there? Like to just be a musician, get out there, try and do your thing as a musician.
You mean how much of it would I do differently?
No, I mean, if you were starting completely again, no one knew that you were Randy Jackson from Zebra, but
right.
You have all the know-how. You've gone through all the lessons that you've had in life, et cetera, et cetera,
right.
et cetera. Would you do anything different? How would you launch your band per se now?
Well, I think it would be tough because unless the band knew as much as I did, and had experienced all that already, it's going to be much harder on me, having to go, come on, this is going to happen 20 years from now. This is going to happen. I could tell you, just trust me. Might be harder on me to have that knowledge. And another thing is, I don't know that it would be as fun.
Mm.
What I would do, I mean, I could think of a dozen things I could do, that might be different. Maybe maybe I could practice more, when I was, and I did practice a lot, but when I was a kid, maybe I would have practiced more, because I know now that I'm going to be successful, or I was successful with it. And maybe I would just do more focus on that. And then maybe maybe I wouldn't want to do it at all. Maybe it's the journey that's more important. It's the learning, it's the excitement. And how excited can you get when you've had the experiences already? It's kind of like seeing a movie for the 10th time. And even for me, like movies, a second or third time, I'm just not into it. I want
Yeah.
to something new. That's why I enjoy watching those things. So I think same thing can be said in life. Um, I might have chosen a different path altogether outside of music, something else that I enjoy. I mean, I really love physics, and I was a physics major in college before the band started doing well, and I might have, that would have been I'm sure I would have had some great times doing that too.
Yeah.
But would all be new experiences.
Yeah.
As far as advice for people, you know, if that's what the question is about, I would, my only advice to people, the one thing that we did that I think really helped with making music work as a career was staying together. The band stays together. Your audience is a family, when you start. And, when you start off, you do have your actual family come to see you, but not all of them are going to be your fans forever.
Yeah.
The people that come and they keep coming, they become kind of a family to you. And the family doesn't want to see you break up. They don't want to see somebody else replacing somebody else in the family. And especially because of the way our career went with, doing so many local shows, playing for 10, 11 years, and people knowing, a part of it was just the experience of being there for a lot of people. And I think, if you can get along with musicians, it's a lot more valuable than playing with a guy that might be better, or oh, this guy's going to be better. We should get rid of him. That, I don't think that helps stuff. It doesn't do too much. If I know that when you think back about it, the Beatles did it. They had to get rid of their drummer.
Yeah.
But these were decisions that were kind of made by the producer. It wasn't anything that they did prior to getting their deal. And I think sticking together. I mean, I couldn't have seen anybody in the Beatles being replaced. And even Led Zeppelin. Once Bonham was gone, that was pretty much it for them.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure there's other reasons. It wouldn't be Led Zeppelin without them, without him, Bonham. And, on a much smaller level, it's the same thing with Zebra, people, because we're a three-piece band, some people come there to see Guy just play his ass off on the drums. Felix and I are good enough, to play with Guy, and they enjoy that, but they're there for Guy, or they come to see Felix, and him playing the keyboards and then doing the bass, or they come to see what I do. So stay together. That's all.
Randy, I think that's a great ending point. I was going to go more into advice, this and that, but that's such golden advice that I think perfect conclusion.
All right, great.
I can't thank you enough for your time. I wish you guys nothing but the success or more success for your future. And, just be safe out on the road and just keep making great music, man. Thank you for everything.
Thanks a lot, Travis. I appreciate it.
Peace.
Same to you.